On July 15, 1992, at approximately 10:35 in the morning, a horrific murder shook the city of London. The crime took place in Wimbledon Common, a sprawling 1,100-acre green space frequented daily by hundreds of people for recreational activities. Michael Murray, a retired architect walking his dog, made the grim discovery of a woman's body near a trail. The victim lay in a pool of blood, bearing multiple stab wounds. Beside her, a 2-year-old boy, covered in his mother's blood, was desperately pleading for her to get up. The victim was identified as Rachel Nickell, 23 years old. The initial examination of the crime scene revealed the brutality of the attack: 49 stab wounds, including strikes that nearly decapitated the victim. Several wounds indicated that Rachel had attempted to defend herself against her attacker. The investigators faced an immediate challenge. While more than 500 people were in the park that morning, no one reported hearing screams or witnessing the attack. The vast size of the area and the large number of visitors made properly isolating the crime scene extremely difficult. The forensic team uncovered crucial evidence: tiny red paint spots in the victim's son's hair, a footprint near a stream where witnesses reported seeing a man washing his hands, signs indicating the victim had been attacked from behind. The murder occurred in broad daylight, in a bustling area of London, something extraordinarily rare for the time. News of the crime quickly dominated British newspaper headlines, generating panic in the local community and putting immense pressure on authorities to solve the case. The Metropolitan Police, commonly known as Scotland Yard, assigned a special team to the investigation. The only survivor and eyewitness was Alex, the victim's 2-year-old son, who had abrasions indicating he had been dragged across the ground during the attack. This crime would initiate one of the longest and most controversial investigations in British criminal history, involving police misconduct, a wrongfully accused suspect, and a 16-year quest for justice. But who was Rachel Nickell, and why did her case remain unsolved for so long? Born on November 23, 1968 in Great Totham, Essex, Rachel Nickell grew up in a middle-class family. Her father, Andrew Nickell, served as an army officer, while her mother Monica devoted herself to the family. During her years at Colchester High School for Girls, Rachel distinguished herself not only academically but also in the arts. At age 11, her talent led her to the Essex Dance Theatre, where she developed skills in dance and performance. Despite her promising artistic potential, she chose to pursue studies in history and English. In 1988, her life took a new direction when she secured a position as a lifeguard at the Richmond Pool. It was there she met Andre Hanscom, a young motorcyclist. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and in 1989, the couple welcomed their son, Alexander Lewis. Though unmarried, Rachel and Andre built a stable family life in the Balham area of South London. Andre worked to support the family, while Rachel chose to dedicate herself fully to motherhood, despite receiving offers to work as a photographic model. In the summer of 1992, Rachel's life seemed promising. She was eagerly awaiting Alex's 3rd birthday, scheduled for the following month. The couple was planning their future, and Rachel was considering resuming her professional career once Alex was a bit older. In her community, Rachel was known for her charitable spirit and willingness to help the elderly and disabled. Neighbors described her as a dedicated mother with an easy smile, always eager to participate in community activities. Her daily routines were simple yet meaningful: morning walks with Alex and the family dog, Molly, park visits, and afternoons dedicated to educational activities with her son. Rachel particularly favored Wimbledon Common for her walks, considering it safer than the parks closer to her home, despite being 5 kilometers away. In the first hours after the murder, Scotland Yard faced what would become one of the greatest challenges in its history. Chief Inspector Mick Wickerson, a veteran police officer, arrived at the crime scene and declared it the most brutal attack he had witnessed in his entire career. The forensic team found themselves in an almost impossible situation. With a crime scene spanning 1,100 acres and approximately 500 people in the park that morning, investigators raced against time and circumstances. There was no DNA from the perpetrator, no adult eyewitnesses, and the area's extent made complete isolation of the location impossible. The only person who had witnessed the crime was Alex, a boy of just 2 years. The police faced an unprecedented dilemma: how to obtain information from such a young child who had just witnessed his own mother's murder. Dr. Jean Harris Hendricks, a child psychologist, was called to assist with the interviews. Initially, investigators hesitated to question the child, fearing it would exacerbate his trauma. However, the lack of other leads forced them to reconsider. A crucial witness emerged when Jane Elizabeth Harriman reported spotting a suspicious man around 10:10 in the morning, just 20 minutes before the crime. The sighting location was 5 minutes away from where the murder occurred. Shortly after, Amanda Phelan reported seeing a man washing his hands in a drainage ditch at 10:40, 10 minutes after the estimated time of the crime. Through several carefully conducted sessions with Alex, always in the presence of his father Andre and Dr. Harris Hendricks, investigators obtained a detailed description of the killer. A Caucasian man with short hair, wearing a white collared shirt, blue pants, and dark shoes, carrying a black bag. The height was estimated at 5 feet 7 inches, age between 20 and 30 years, with a peculiar characteristic: he walked slightly hunched, as if trying to hide his face. The forensics team managed to recover some physical evidence: microscopic red paint stains in Alex's hair, footprint marks near the stream, and injury patterns indicating the nature of the attack. The abrasions on Alex's face were consistent with having been dragged across the ground during the attack. Media coverage intensified daily, and panic spread throughout the community. Under growing pressure, the detective team led by Keith Petter initiated an extensive investigation, interviewing family members, investigating local criminals, and analyzing patterns of similar crimes in the region. Investigators soon realized they were facing an unprecedented case in British criminal history. A brutal murder in broad daylight, without conclusive forensic evidence, having a 2-year-old child as the only eyewitness. It was the beginning of an investigation that would expose the fragilities of the British judicial system and forever change Scotland Yard's investigative procedures. The investigation of Rachel Nickell's murder took a controversial turn when police attention focused on Colin Stagg, an unemployed 29-year-old man who lived alone near Wimbledon Common. Several witnesses reported seeing him in the park on the morning of the crime, and his appearance matched the composite sketches developed based on witness statements. Scotland Yard decided to consult Paul Britton, a renowned criminal psychologist, to develop a profile of the killer. Britton's profile described a solitary man in his 20s or 30s, possibly living near the crime scene. It also included more disturbing characteristics: interest in the occult, fascination with knives, and tendencies toward sadistic fantasies. Suspicion of Stagg intensified when investigators searched his apartment. They discovered drawings, books, and writings related to Wicca, an ancient pagan religion. In the back room, they found religious symbols, a pentagram marked on the carpet, and ritual garments, including a black hood. Police interest in Stagg increased further when a woman revealed she had received an explicit letter from him after publishing an advertisement in a local newspaper's Lonely Hearts column. Prior to Rachel's murder, Stagg had already been accused of inappropriately exposing himself to a woman in Wimbledon Common, an incident he claimed was a misunderstanding while sunbathing. During initial questioning, Stagg stated he had walked his dogs in the park between 8:15 and 9:15, returning home more than an hour before the murder. His version of events included seeing a woman with a baby carriage being followed by a tall, broad man. However, investigators couldn't find anyone matching the description he provided. Stagg's alibi was questioned when his neighbor, Susan Gale, stated she had seen him going to the park between 9:25 and 9:30, wearing a white t-shirt, jeans, and carrying a black bag, a description similar to that provided by the eyewitness. 2 days later, in an identification parade at Brixton Police Station, Jane Harriman, the witness who had helped with the composite sketch, positively identified Stagg as the suspicious man she had seen on the morning of the crime. Despite the circumstantial elements, investigators had no physical evidence linking Stagg to the murder. Nevertheless, the police were convinced he was guilty. This conviction would lead to one of the most controversial operations in British police history, an elaborate trap that would not only destroy Scotland Yard's reputation, but also ruin an innocent man's life. The media began to focus intensely on Stagg, capturing his every move and documenting his public reactions. Cameras recorded his furious exit from court, cursing at reporters, after being fined £200 for the indecent exposure charge, a separate incident that only served to increase suspicions about him. What no one knew at that moment was that this fixation on Colin Stagg was about to transform into one of the greatest judicial errors in British history. Desperate to solve the case, and convinced that Colin Stagg was the killer, Scotland Yard conceived one of the most controversial operations in police history. Dubbed Operation Edsel, The plan involved an elaborate psychological trap developed with the help of criminal psychologist Paul Britton. An undercover police officer, using the codename Lizzie James, was assigned to the mission. The operation began in January 1993, when Lizzie sent her first letter to Stagg, pretending to know Julie, a woman with whom he had previously corresponded through a newspaper advertisement. Over 7 months, Lizzie and Stagg exchanged 43 letters. Every word from Lizzie was carefully chosen under the guidance of Keith Petter and Paul Britton. Her letters were filled with explicit fantasies, designed to provoke a confession. The strategy was clear: make Stagg reveal his supposed violent impulses. In March 1993, the operation intensified. Lizzie began expressing an interest in domination and humiliation in her letters, subtly trying to direct the conversation toward violent themes. In response, Stagg admitted he could hurt her if that pleased her, but insisted he preferred gentleness to violence. Frustrated with the lack of progress through letters, investigators authorized personal meetings. The first meeting occurred in a public park, with undercover officers discreetly monitoring the situation. During lunch, Lizzie shared a fabricated story about her involvement with black magic and satanic rituals, including an alleged human sacrifice involving a pregnant woman. Even faced with these extreme provocations, Stagg remained cautious in his responses. In one final desperate attempt, Lizzie suggested she wished he had been responsible for the murder in Wimbledon Common. Stagg merely reiterated that the police had questioned him about the crime, but maintained his innocence. The operation began to unravel when Stagg gave an interview to the Daily Star, publicly denying any involvement in Rachel's murder. The investigators, realizing that the chances of a confession were remote, decided to use his letters and meetings as circumstantial evidence. As a last resort, the team planned a dramatic confrontation. Lizzie James unexpectedly entered the interrogation room, revealing herself as a police officer. Stagg, visibly shaken by the betrayal, remained silent. The operation that had cost months of planning and considerable resources had come to an end, but its consequences for the British judicial system were only beginning. Scotland Yard believed they had gathered sufficient evidence through the operation to secure a conviction. The case would now move to the courts, where the legality and ethics of this elaborate trap would be meticulously examined, leading to one of the most embarrassing moments in British Metropolitan Police history. Colin Stagg's trial was scheduled to begin in February 1994 at the Old Bailey, London's historic Central Criminal Court. Before the jury could even be impaneled, the defense presented a motion that would completely change the course of the case. They questioned the admissibility of evidence obtained through the undercover operation. The legal battle that followed exposed the inner workings of a problematic investigation. The defense argued that Operation Edsel had no direct connection to the case and raised serious ethical questions about police methods. The Crown prosecution countered, insisting that the operation had been crucial to exploring the defendant's supposed fantasies, which they believed had motivated the crime. In September 1994, after several months of deliberation, Judge Ognall delivered his historic decision. In a devastating critique of police conduct, he rejected all evidence obtained through the honey trap. The magistrate not only dismissed the evidence, but also vehemently condemned the Metropolitan Police's methods, declaring they had exceeded all acceptable limits of investigation. The case collapsed on the first day of trial. The largest murder investigation in British history, costing more than £3 million of public funds, ended in a resounding fiasco. Colin Stagg was acquitted of all charges. Scotland Yard reacted with indignation to the decision. Metropolitan Police Chief Commissioner Paul Condon even publicly suggested that the trial's outcome had been influenced by qualified lawyers who managed to secure Stagg's acquittal. In a controversial decision, the police announced they would not seek other suspects. The repercussions were immediate and devastating for all involved. Psychologist Paul Britton, who had helped architect the operation, faced professional misconduct charges from the British Psychological Society. Detective Keith Petter saw his career destroyed and opted for early retirement. The police officer who acted as Lizzie James also left the force, citing stress and mental breakdown due to the investigation. In 2001, she sued the police and received a compensation of £125,000, an amount that generated public outrage for being significantly higher than the £22,000 granted to Alex, Rachel's orphan son. Rachel Nickell's family was devastated by the outcome. Rachel's father expressed his anguish publicly. "The files on my daughter's murder have been closed, but where is justice?" The case that should have brought comfort to the victim's family had instead become a symbol of institutional failure. The collapse of the Stagg case represented not just the end of a failed investigation, but also marked a turning point in British criminal justice history. The fiasco would force a complete re-evaluation of police investigative methods and establish new precedents regarding the acceptable limits of undercover operations. Colin Stagg's judicial acquittal was far from meaning his liberation in society's eyes. Even after leaving court as a free man, he discovered his life would never be the same. The British press, which had obsessively followed the case, continued to present him as the man who had possibly escaped justice. The stigma of the case haunted every aspect of his daily life. His residence was regularly vandalized, with vulgar graffiti labeling him a murderer. Neighbors avoided contact, and local establishments frequently refused him as a customer. The man who had been officially cleared by justice found himself a prisoner of perpetual social condemnation. Finding employment became practically impossible. Any attempt to rebuild a normal life was sabotaged by the notoriety of his name. Job interviews ended abruptly when potential employers recognized his name or face from newspaper headlines. Forced unemployment only served to reinforce prejudices against him. Meanwhile, the Metropolitan Police of London publicly maintained their conviction of Stagg's guilt, even after the trial. This official stance from authorities only fueled public hostility. Newspapers continued publishing speculative articles about his possible involvement in the crime, keeping suspicion alive in the public mind. Social isolation became his new reality. Old friendships dissolved, and forming new relationships was practically impossible. His love life was completely destroyed. Any potential partner who searched his name on the internet would find countless articles linking him to the brutal murder. Stagg's mental health deteriorated significantly. The constant public harassment, combined with the trauma of the police investigation and the betrayal he felt during the undercover operation, left deep psychological scars. The relentless media persecution forced him to live in a constant state of anxiety and paranoia. Years would pass before justice began to be restored. In 2008, after the identification of the real killer, the Metropolitan Police of London was forced to make a public apology to Colin Stagg. The British state finally acknowledged the judicial error and compensated him with £706,000 for the mishandled investigation and wrongful prosecution. Surprisingly, even after everything he endured, Stagg declared he held no grudge against the police as an institution. His only animosity remained directed at psychologist Paul Britton, whose criminal profile he believed had been the catalyst that destroyed his life. The compensation money could never make up for the lost years, nor erase the emotional scars left by a decade and a half of unjust persecution. In 2002, 10 years after Rachel Nickell's murder, Scotland Yard initiated a complete review of the case. A small team, composed of police officers and retired investigators, was assigned to re-examine every aspect of the original investigation. But now they had an advantage that didn't exist in 1992: revolutionary advances in DNA analysis technology. Over a decade, forensic science had evolved drastically. Techniques that previously required large samples of biological material could now produce results from microscopic quantities. Evidence previously considered insignificant could finally tell its story. For 18 months, forensic experts worked meticulously, re-examining Rachel Nickell's clothes. In July 2003 came the discovery that would change everything. Microscopic traces of male DNA were found. Although the sample was tiny, it was sufficient for the new analysis methods. The initial results were surprising. The DNA didn't match Andre, Rachel's partner, nor her son Alex, nor any investigator who had handled the evidence. More significantly, it didn't match Colin Stagg. The discovery not only confirmed Stagg's innocence, but also proved that the real killer was still at large. The review team expanded their search, comparing the DNA profile with criminal databases. The process was meticulous and time-consuming, but investigators knew they finally had concrete scientific evidence. For the first time in a decade, the investigation no longer depended on speculative theories or psychological profiles. They had irrefutable physical proof in hand. This discovery not only officially reopened the case, but also forced a complete re-evaluation of all aspects of the original investigation. The police, who had insisted for years on Colin Stagg's guilt, now faced the incontestable reality that they had pursued the wrong man. The DNA evidence represented more than just a simple turning point in the case. it was a complete revolution in the investigation. After years of speculation, theories, and misplaced accusations, science finally offered a clear path to the truth. Rachel Nickell's killer had left his molecular signature at the crime scene, and now it was just a matter of time until that signature revealed his identity. Robert Napper emerged from the shadows as Rachel Nickell's true killer in July 2004, when DNA evidence finally connected him to the crime. His identification revealed a series of missed opportunities that could have prevented multiple tragedies. Born on February 25, 1966 in Erith, southeast London, Napper had a childhood marked by family dysfunction. Son of a bus driver who regularly abused his wife Pauline, he was sent to an orphanage at age 9 after his parents' divorce. For 6 years, he received psychiatric treatment at Moseley Hospital in Camberwell, where he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and paranoid schizophrenia. His personality underwent a dramatic change at age 12 after being assaulted during a family camping trip. He became extremely reclusive, but also began demonstrating disturbing behaviors, including bullying his younger siblings and voyeurism directed at his sister. By age 18, his behavior had become so erratic that his own mother expelled him from home. Napper's criminal escalation began in 1986. At age 20, he was detained for carrying an air rifle and shooting small animals. In August 1989, he attacked a 31-year-old woman with a knife in Plumstead Common. His own mother alerted police about her son's confession, but authorities failed to follow up on the report. Between 1989 and 1992, Napper continued his series of attacks. Police received 2 alerts from neighbors about his suspicious behavior and requested blood samples, but he never appeared to provide them. Even so, he was eliminated as a suspect due to a height discrepancy in descriptions. In October 1992, 3 months after Rachel's murder, Napper was arrested for stalking an employee at Plumstead Police Station. A search of his apartment revealed a red toolbox containing weapons, including a .22 caliber pistol, knives, and a crossbow. Maps with notes about how to tie and restrain people were also found, along with a suspicious diary. Inexplicably, he received only 8 weeks in prison for firearms violations. The authorities' negligence had tragic consequences. In November 1993, Napper brutally murdered 27-year-old Samantha Bissett and her 4-year-old daughter, Jasmine, in Plumstead. The savagery of these murders finally led to his capture after a fingerprint was found at the crime scene. In May 1994, Napper was detained and, in October 1995, pleaded guilty to manslaughter by diminished responsibility, being committed indefinitely to Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital. The similarities between Samantha's and Rachel's murders were striking, but even then the connection wasn't properly investigated. Subsequent investigations revealed that Napper was likely the infamous Green Chain Rapist, responsible for at least 70 attacks in southeast London areas. 4 of the first attacks were definitively linked to him through his own confessions in 1995. More evidence emerged. His shoes matched the footprint found near the stream in Wimbledon Common, and the red paint from his toolbox matched the stains found in Alex's hair. A knife discovered buried 800 meters from Rachel's crime scene contained fingerprints that, although initially dismissed, were later identified as belonging to Napper. This crucial evidence was ignored at the time, as investigators were already fixated on Colin Stagg as a suspect. In July 2006, a Scotland Yard team made a crucial visit to Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital. Their objective, to interview Robert Napper about Rachel Nickell's murder. After 14 years, DNA evidence had finally revealed his guilt, but Napper, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and Asperger's syndrome, remained silent during questioning. On November 28, 2007, Robert Napper was officially charged with Rachel Nickell's murder. Initially, he pleaded not guilty, and the trial began on November 11, 2008 at the Old Bailey. However, in a surprising turn on December 18, 2008, Napper changed his plea, admitting guilt to manslaughter based on diminished responsibility. Judge Griffith Williams, presiding over the case, didn't hesitate in his assessment. He declared Napper an extremely dangerous man and ordered his indefinite detention at Broadmoor. The sentence ensured he would remain isolated from society, considering the gravity of his crimes and his mental condition. The Metropolitan Police of London was forced into a moment of deep reflection and public contrition. In a historic statement, the institution issued a formal apology to Colin Stagg. It is necessary to establish the truth about 1993, declared a spokesperson. Colin Stagg was wrongly accused of Rachel's murder. He is completely innocent of any involvement in this case, and today we apologize for the mistakes made in the early 1990s. Financial compensation followed. Stagg received £706,000 as compensation for the improper handling of the investigation and wrongful prosecution. It was a significant amount, but no sum could truly compensate for the years of persecution and social isolation he had endured. For Rachel's family, the resolution brought mixed feelings. The confirmation of the real killer's identity offered a kind of closure, but also raised painful questions about how he could have been detained much earlier, potentially preventing other tragedies. The Rachel Nickell case became a turning point for British criminal justice. The failures in the original investigation led to significant changes in police procedures, especially in the use of psychological profiles and undercover operations. The excessive reliance on speculative theories and resistance to considering contradictory evidence served as a painful lesson about the dangers of fixating on a single suspect. 16 years after Rachel's murder, justice was finally achieved. But the price of this delay was high: destroyed lives, shaken public trust, and the painful awareness that everything could have been different if the warning signs about Robert Napper had been heeded years earlier. Today, Alex Nickell lives in Barcelona, where he has built a new life away from the shadows of the past. At 27 years old, he became a yoga teacher, a choice that reflects a remarkable journey of healing and transformation. The boy who witnessed his mother's brutal murder at age 2 found his own path to peace. In an act of courage and catharsis, Alex decided to share his story through a book titled Letting Go, a true story of loss, murder, and survival. The work is not just an account of the tragic events, but a profound reflection on forgiveness and human resilience. His father, Andre Hanscom, now 55 years old, demonstrates extraordinary wisdom when speaking about Rachel's killer. Forgiveness, for us, means that if you don't forgive the person who harmed you, you will become that person over time, he explains. This surprising perspective reveals how father and son managed to transform a devastating tragedy into a lesson in compassion. What makes their story even more remarkable is the absence of bitterness. Alex claims to harbor no animosity toward the man who destroyed his childhood. His criticism, instead, is directed at the systemic failures that allowed the tragedy to occur. This story isn't about whether the police made mistakes, he reflects. It's about an institution that became larger than the individual it was designed to protect. The move to Barcelona, initially an escape from intense British media attention, transformed into a new beginning. Away from the site of the tragedy, father and son managed to rebuild their lives, keeping Rachel's memory alive without being consumed by the pain of her loss. The Rachel Nickell case left permanent marks on the British judicial system. The lessons learned from the investigation's errors led to significant changes in police procedures and how evidence is evaluated. The story serves as a constant reminder of the consequences of hasty conclusions and the importance of following evidence, not theories. But perhaps the most powerful legacy is the message of forgiveness and transformation embodied by Alex and Andre. In a world where tragedies frequently generate endless cycles of bitterness and vengeance, they chose a different path. Their journey demonstrates that even from the darkest circumstances, it's possible to emerge not just as a survivor, but truly transformed. Rachel Nickell's story will never be just about her tragic murder. It will also be about a son and father who found strength to transform their pain into purpose, about a quest for justice that exposed systemic flaws, and about the regenerative power of forgiveness. In its complexity and humanity, it continues to teach us vital lessons about justice, recovery, and the human spirit's capacity to transcend even the deepest tragedies. What do you think about this story? Could Robert Napper have been detained earlier, or would he have escaped the law anyway? Leave your opinion in the comments. If you enjoyed this case, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real criminal stories. Turn on notifications to be notified of upcoming cases. Until next time.